everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk MLOps. My name is Becky, and I'm on a mission to find out the latest trends, challenges, and prospects within machine learning, and with a particular focus on machine learning operations, or MLOps. Throughout this series, I'll be talking to experts within the field who will share their knowledge as well as advice for implementing, monitoring, and scaling successful machine learning practices. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk MLOps. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Oleksandr Stasyk, who is MLOps Engineering Team Lead at Accenture. Thanks so much for joining me today, Sash. I'm really excited to get into it.
And thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Cool. Okay, so I've got it in front of me here, actually. You've written recently an article entitled MLOps, The Evolution of the T-Shaped Engineer, which, if I've understood correctly, goes into what an MLOps role really means. Is that right? Could you tell us a bit about
Yeah,
it?
that's correct. So, as I've been leading a team of MLOps engineers at my work, I've had some questions and requests for advice in terms of how would you hire some engineers for it?
Mm,
And my immediate reaction was that y- it's pretty much impossible to write a job description for
mhm,
all the skills that you'd wish for and actually find a candidate in a timely manner. It's not impossible because those people do exist. I thought I'd write something down about what the journeys to this magical MLOps role would consist of. And as we've been hiring team members, it was quite clear that there are different directions that people come from that land in this MLOps space. And at least two categories I could name myself is somebody who's coming from a software engineering or DevOps space
mm,
and and becomes interested in ML, or vice versa, somebody coming from data science in the ML world and gets interested in the ops space, whichever, or software engineering, software architecture, whichever, like whatever that might mean in the organization itself. So it's pretty heavily organization and problem dependent as well. So um, my experience is fairly subjective. That's a little
yeah.
disclaimer here. But what I think is quite important to remember is that if you do decide to say, oh, we need an MLOps team, you need to think very hard about what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of your current organization and what kind of skill sets do you want to prioritize. So this could be something along the lines of your software engineering and software architecture is lacking. I could go into more examples later.
Yeah.
Or you have a bunch of software engineers, but they're not too experienced in data science and machine learning in the domain itself. Individuals um, starts to evolve the T-shaped skill structure into more of a pie-shaped. And sometimes I had
Mm,
some feedback on that already. It's not. It could be not just pie-shaped with the two legs, but you might start growing a third leg in the actual domain of the specific data itself. So
okay.
it can evolve to be even more complicated than that. However, the bottom line is that if somebody asks, "Oh, could you write a job description for an MLOps engineer or an MLOps member of the team?" It's unfortunately, at least in my opinion, it's not a straightforward, straightforward document that you could just nail down because the requirements would become like pretty, pretty crazy.
And do you recommend in a team having multiple MLOps engineers that may have come from different backgrounds, the different ones you've mentioned, rather than having one with just some, because I'm guessing they would bring different skill sets, right? You mentioned these different backgrounds will bring different skills. Is it if a company, if an organization has the means to do so, do you recommend bringing on multiple people from those different backgrounds?
Yeah, so that's exactly it. I think the key here is to maintain cross functionality in your team so that you have, if not in the team itself, but at least across the organization, you have enough um, variety in the skill sets to be able to cover all the gaps that you might identify. And over time, that organization might evolve as well. But you quite obviously need some machine learning expertise.
Yeah, of course.
But on top of that, I would very much, at least for my own personal journey, you should definitely consider strong software architecture and just general software development background as being quite important as well, because those two things go hand in hand in creating some sort of productive system. And to be honest, I don't think this is a hugely new idea. However, I do feel like a lot of the times it's very easy to kind of gloss over it and say, oh, we've got somebody who's a genius and he knows everything, and kind of like keep carrying on. However, you're making something from scratch. It's something you do have to consider. You have to be able to create this cross functionality in such a way that like it cohesively works together,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yes, that makes sense. And for organizations or companies that maybe unfortunately don't have the luxury of hiring multiple engineers with those different skill sets, what would you recommend to them?
I think the most fundamental key part here is growth mindset. If you're familiar with that, so a growth mindset is as opposed to a fixed mindset. There's a nice book written about this. I'm hoping you can link it in the description. So if you have a fundamental growth mindset, um, then learning from one discipline to the other should be a fairly natural transition. In fact, sometimes it might be quite an exciting opportunity, because it might be the case that you're, for example, a bit bored of doing the same stuff for years on end, and all of a sudden you get a new challenge that challenges your brain, and it sparks new joy of learning inside you, and you get the kind of learning feeling that you've not felt for a while.
Mm, awesome. And could we, I suppose it would be great to hear about your journey then, as you mentioned before, sort of which one of these backgrounds are you from, or are you from a mixture?
So um, over time, my career is primarily software engineering, architecture. I would say mainly based around web development itself. Like I consider myself a full stack engineer, whatever that
Mm,
means to people, with a good dollop of DevOps in there as well.
mhm,
Um, and just to reflect what I just said, is that I think I was feeling a little bit bored working in the same problems, really, because I started seeing patterns, and there's kind of like, you know, we should be doing this. This is kind of the thing, and the it's not that wasn't learning wasn't happening, but it wasn't as intense. And all of a sudden, one day, I got the opportunity to essentially become this buzzword MLOps thing that nobody knew what it actually meant,
yeah,
and I was exposed to a whole bunch of very intelligent people, and I think that was the first time I felt a very strong ping of imposter syndrome that I've not felt for a long, long time. And I was lucky enough to be in an incredibly good environment for learning as well. So I think that was an important factor as well, where I had the opportunity to actually ask how, like, what was what, essentially. So that gave me the opportunity to grow my machine learning leg, and basically start learning
mm,
bits and pieces about data science, bits and pieces about machine learning, and intricacies um, of AI itself, I guess. And a lot of that stuff kind of came naturally. A lot of stuff was learning some terminology,
mhm.
and to this day, I'm still learning about it, for sure.
Well, I suppose it's one of those things that you can, you can, I know it sounds like a cliche, but you can never stop learning really, right? Especially in the AI and machine learning field, because it's evolving all the time, and
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
fast, so rapidly. Um, so I suppose that's a really nice thing, is that there's always more to learn. Um, and so I suppose with your specific background, the bits that were not lacking but were improved upon and you got to learn more about would be with the ML side. What were the bits that you already that how do I explain it? What were the bits that you had coming from the DevOps and software background that you think was a benefit to have in the MLOps space?
So, um, the my previous experience really enabled me to start looking things at an architectural level, and it was a wide variety of things that I could address and actually strategically plan in a way, which is quite interesting because there were things that I just didn't know and I had to learn. So that was one part. However, framing it all as a software architecture problem really enabled me to move forward and essentially, dare I say, enabled value delivery in a lot more productive way rather than being stuck in constant loops of we're not sure what we should do here. So, um, applying my experience in software architecture and just general development really helped me to to create a foundation for the machine learning features, I guess, for machine learning specific problems that existed. And it really helped with just creating something really robust rather than um, essentially kicking the can down the road forever.
Yeah, yeah. Nice. And what advice would you give to those who may come from, well, one of the various backgrounds that you've mentioned, but who want to take it from where they are now, um, and work more in the MLOps space? Are there specific skills that they need to work on, or specific pathways, or does it vary?
So I go over it very briefly in my article, but I think just given that those are the two paths, which I don't think that's the exhaustive list. However, if you're someone in my position, for example, who has a decent enough software background and wants to get into machine learning, I think getting some theory and some terminology into your brain to begin with is a
Mm,
really good start, so that you can start communicating effectively, and then you can start applying that theory into actual implementation. So I'm a big learner, but I perform best when I learn by doing. So for me, it was a case of how do I implement this theory in practice, essentially.
mm,
And once you can wade your way through the sea of terminology, things start to become clearer and clearer and clearer, and you can start having very productive conversations with AI researchers, for example. Um, and again, this like you should really lean on your passion about of learning new things. But to be honest, that's a good advice for both sides, really.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm,
Conversely, if you are somebody who's more into data science and machine learning and you're passionate in programming, the sometimes quite a lot of people I've spoken to, there was a really good foundation for programming to begin with. So people are passionate about automating things, people are passionate about just writing scripts to begin with, and that's the passion for learning, I think, that should really be fueled. So
mm,
essentially, like, keep on trying to automate things, making things more efficient, and wondering about if there are better ways of doing things. So that in itself, like that way of thinking, made me a better software engineer to begin with. Is
yeah,
essentially always asking, are there better patterns of implementing something over and over and over and over, and never staying still, because there's always better ways of doing things. Um, and then finally, the last part I think is quite crucial is that there'll be patterns that are fairly established, and it's always worth knowing them, and then it becomes a pragmatic choice of, do we implement something in the proper way today, or do we do
mm.
it next month, depending on priorities. um, and find yourself some people who enable your learning and can help you out in both ways.
Like a community, I guess, a good
Yes.
community that you can, I suppose there are lots of ways, aren't there? There are lots of meetups you can go to. I've been to a few as well, trying to learn myself about MLOps, and there are always great ways to meet people. That's true. Or maybe within your own company too, I guess, right? Those
Yeah.
working in the MLOps space. Um, in your company. Awesome. No, that I think that's really great mindset for them to get in that you're talking about. And then what about for those who are leading an MLOps team, as that's what you're doing now, what tips would you give for from that leadership perspective?
So aside of appreciating that unicorns are rare,
Yeah, definitely.
referring
I was going
back
to say
to our
that's
statement,
definitely got to be on the list.
um, from a more managerial point of view, I'd say it's always important to know your team very well. So if you know your team, you can make more intelligent choices in terms of how to making the sum of the parts greater than the whole. And last sentence in my uh, article was, regardless of your composition, a good team dynamic will always prevail. So really, really make sure to prioritize your team dynamic. I would say one last thing, another aspect that I kind of didn't mention so far is, what does MLOps actually mean? Like, it's a nice buzzword, but it quite clearly derives from DevOps, and DevOps in itself is still, in my opinion, slightly misnamed or misunderstood buzzword, because it refers to a culture rather than the role. And when I say somebody's a DevOps engineer, people expect you to kind of do stuff in the cloud and um, so some books I would very much recommend is the DevOps Handbook explains really well, but the core of it is that there is a feedback loop, and it has to incorporate good throughput. Essentially, you can do things quickly. Good feedback, which is you can monitor things well and you can find out whether things break or not. That can vary from like your tests to your monitoring. And lastly, implementing experimentation on top of that to say, like, we would like to create feature A, how does it compare to B, and making scientific decisions based on that. Like, A has increased our revenue by X amount is definitely an objectively better choice. So how does that translate to MLOps? Um, in my opinion, it's still a culture of feedback. However, now we have an extra element of a much more scientific and data science driven culture. So it's not just about um, we have a model we need to throw in production. So this is kind of like the usual joke about DevOps, is that somebody made an application, they throw it over the wall, and it's DevOps problem now. So you can make analogies with models with MLOps and say, I've developed a model, make it work in production now, right? So that's what I think is not MLOps.
Mm,
MLOps should be the culture of feedback. And in order to do that, you need to have very tightly team. Like, this is not even just an intra-team problem, but inter-team problem. So you need to make sure that teams across organizations work well together.
mm,
So not only are your MLOps engineers able and are on top of the infrastructure and can deploy things in production, but they need to create something that's self-servable for model developers themselves. And they need to give feedback about that as well. Example being, if somebody didn't um, optimize the random forests and they can grow forever, when MLOps people try to deploy in production, is just going to blow through the RAM limits immediately. So how does that then feed back to the model developers to say you should do some hyperparameter optimization on your random forest to make sure that they are optimized and you know exactly how much memory you should be using when running in production. So this culture of feedback, once again, mirrors DevOps in my opinion. So I think that's an important part, not just for leaders of MLOps teams, but organizations to remember what MLOps should really be about, and don't just stick ops on the end and expect people to run
yeah.
things in production.
Yeah, no, I get that. And it makes sense that's like you said, so you'd call it a feedback loop, right? Sort of that. And you're saying that's the same within DevOps and MLOps, right? That's that same culture. Is that right? You're sort of the central concept is really about the culture. And I guess, and do you have any tips at all for how um, team leads or leaders within MLOps can implement that culture?
Oh, that's a question.
Yeah.
Once again, I think the foundation is you need to know your team dynamic. You need to understand how your teams work and interact. So
Yeah.
first and foremost, you need to not necessarily solve the people problems, but understand the people problems.
Mhm.
So once you have team dynamic that is functional to begin with, then you
Yes.
can start thinking about implementing processes and technologies that can help with it. So without going into too much detail, you can imagine that automatic monitoring of model performance and alerting back to the model developers that are owning those models to begin with
Mm.
could create some sort of feedback loop. But that's just a very, very concrete, very, very low level, very fine, detailed implementation example. Similar with processes, you can implement automated tests in your CI/CD pipelines where you have even MLOps engineers implementing automated tests for speech to text and text to speech, or vice versa implementations, to make sure that your automated synthesized speech doesn't say the wrong words to begin with, right? And that
Yeah.
could be fed back to the model developers as well. So there are various processes slash technologies, or a combination of both, that you can create these feedback loops. And the tighter they are, obviously, the that way you can bring back feedback information to the source, as in model
Awesome.
developers, for example.
Yeah. Cool. And then in terms of within your team, or just that you've seen in general, in terms of the challenges that you're seeing a lot of currently within MLOps, could you tell us a bit about those?
So I think this would be not just an MLOps specific challenge, but I can imagine this could be applied quite concretely to MLOps as well. Is that because some implementations could get quite unruly and quite big, like siloing of knowledge is always a never-ending battle. Essentially, how do we make sure that um, at, at least more than one person has some knowledge about a component,
Yeah.
as
Yes.
as opposed to just the creator of it, for example. So that's one battle that I think I'll be fighting until the end of days.
For a long time. Okay, nice. And are there any other future challenges or things that you can see, that you can foresee, that maybe haven't come yet, but teams and people can prepare for? Or is it too soon to say?
Possibly too soon to say. I prefer to tackle things in as much of an agile way as possible. It's kind of
Yeah.
like solve the problem that's immediate in front of you. That kind of goes into like lean methodologies. Um,
Mhm.
it's also tough to say because again, it depends on your area of problems. It depends on your organization itself
Yeah.
and which area of business in. And I, I probably should put it depends as a as the actual answer itself.
Yeah, it
I'm
depends.
afraid it's a cop out, but it's
No,
true.
no, 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 but sometimes that is the answer. It really can depend on so many factors, and there isn't just one. But I suppose, would you, maybe if I reframe the question to whatever the challenges are that come up, do you have any generalized tips on how people, teams, and organizations can deal with challenges, whatever they may be, when they come? Is it again going back to that feedback and communication loop, would you say, is
I
central
think
to
so.
dealing with them?
So given those fundamentals, the challenges should be, in theory, at least minimized. So making sure that you have good feedback loops will essentially give you early warnings about things that might not work. And this is kind of like starting to lean into agile development, is that don't plan too much ahead to have like a 6 months deadline to implement something to then come back and say, well, I was wrong all along.
Yeah.
Um, so as long as you have good fundamentals in terms of like just software process and being as agile as you can, getting feedback as frequently as you can. And last part is, well, kind of going hand in hand with that is then making sure that you're actually doing the right thing. That could be really tough sometimes. Sometimes you'll wake up at night, 3 o'clock in the morning, saying, "Is what I'm doing important?" I'm not sure who even to ask, but I guess we'll find out after your next iteration of feedback. You should be able to get some guidance in terms of if you're heading in the right direction or not.
Awesome. That makes sense. And in terms of MLOps tools, because I know there are, from what I've seen, there are so many out there. Um, do you have any recommendations of what you personally, or within your team, what are the best MLOps tools that you've found that work best for your problems that you're trying to solve?
I'm afraid, again, it depends. It depends on the problem space. Even me personally, the variety is huge in terms of like the problem space. So like I can't pinpoint to some of them. In all honesty, I think from a software architecture point of view,
Mm,
is that it's quite rare that if you have, especially an AI first company, it's quite rare that you'll keep your architecture simple for long.
Mm.
So in a way, if you think about it, you'll probably want to expand to some sort of complex system. So be prepared to um, tackle distributed systems, for example, and that starts going into like hosting containers in Kubernetes, all that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Um, Again, that's about as general, or like that's about as specific I could go in the general case,
Yeah.
and it might not be helpful in a lot of places. So I'll probably just summarize it with yet again, I'm afraid it depends. But I
No,
think
yeah.
complexity is inevitable. That's probably like one thing beyond it depends, I would say, is that like be prepared to tackle complicated architectures and complicated systems.
And do you think those can change over time? Is it a bit of try and testing what works best for your team? As you've mentioned, it depends. And do you ever find that you change around the systems you use or um
So this is where I would probably lean back into Agile and say that you need to be prepared to like essentially pivot on your choices. So as soon as you verify that one tool is not fit for purpose, don't be afraid to say, "Oh, we made like we made the decisions based on the information we had back in the past, and now we have more information, so we have to make a different choice."
yeah. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Um I think the final thing I'd love to talk to you about is sort of just it can be MLOps related or a mixture of AI and MLOps, or even if there are things outside of MLOps that you find really exciting. What for you is the most exciting thing happening right now in AI?
Oh.
I know, or things. There may be, I know there are, I'm sure there are a
Everybody,
multitude, but
everybody's going to say Chat GPT here, aren't they?
I know, I know. I mean, feel free. You can. You don't have to. I know ChatGPT is amazing. I've tried it too, but I know there are a lot of really exciting things out there. What are you feeling passionate about at the minute?
If I'm honest, lately I had some very interesting reinforcement learning challenges. Like, for example, trying to implement some board game logic and use reinforcement learning to create models that could play against themselves. But that's kind of like a side project that I'd just be doing in my own time. Um, Again, that's nowhere near as exciting as Chat GPT, like swallowing the
No,
world.
yeah. Have you tried GPT? What have your thoughts
Yes,
been so far?
in all honesty, it's like the logical steps, and I imagine it getting a more and more and more impressive as time goes on. There are quite clear limitations if you know what to look for, but at the same time, it's enough already to impress people who haven't been interested in AI. And kind of echoing your previous podcast is that this is a really good thing for raising AI awareness and raising interest in people.
Yes.
And just the other day, I described it as Ultron from the Avengers film, where somebody fed the internet to an AI, but luckily they didn't give him a body, so
Yes.
he won't be able to take over the world with all the knowledge of the
Not
internet.
just yet, not just
Yeah,
yet. Give it a bit longer. No, I think that's a
exactly.
really good point though about raising awareness. And I was just having a conversation yesterday, and that someone was telling me that they found it interesting. There are people from all different industries that may have nothing to do with AI, and they're chatting with each other, about Chat GPT and other open AI things, and image generators like DALI and all of
Yeah,
these that it would in the past it would have only been people who work within these fields
yeah,
talking about them, and now you've got everyone in your family discussing them, saying look what I've made today,
exactly.
look
Yeah,
what I've done. So that is really good and I
yeah,
don't know, I don't know what implications or changes that will mean for the future, but I'm assuming it will just mean even more, the mixing of AI with the average person, I guess.
yeah.
Would you agree?
I think the mixing of AI probably. I apologize for using a slightly fancier word, like augmentation of humans using AI
There we
is
go. That's
is is
that's
the
that's
is the
that's
key
what I
here.
meant.
Yeah. But I think that's where the real power comes in, is that a lot of people say, "Oh my God, AI will replace X," but it's almost never the case. There is no automated car that can do everything a human can today, not least that I know of. But it's almost always the case that the car helps the human drive quite a lot. And that's the same with GPT chat and all the image generator models as well, is that they'll never draw you a perfect human with, like 5 fingers that they should be, for example. But an artist can then go make some touch-ups, and they had most of the picture already drawn, and then they could create a feedback loop with the AI model itself. So the artist is using AI to actually become a lot more productive, rather than saying, "Oh my God, I've been replaced," right?
Yes.
And it's the same thing with ChatGPT as well. Like, you don't have to use the output directly. Like, it's giving you some text that you can interpret yourself, and you can make your own human choices based on whether you want to use the text, you want to alter it. I
Yes.
think it's a lot, it's a lot more obvious with ChatGPT, because you can give it feedback directly, and it'll remember and it'll update its answers.
Yes, that's true. That's true. No, I completely agree with what you're saying. I feel like replace is the wrong word. It just changes slightly the role, or it's just not exactly the same. I've done translations in the past. I've worked on translation tools now that you can use. But it's exactly the same thing as what you're saying, if I type into a machine translator in one language and I'd like it to come out in another, it's not perfect when it comes out, and I still have to go in and make edits and check that it's okay. But it just does a big bulk of the
Exactly.
work done
Yep.
already. And
Yep.
then the role, I would say, just for example, in that case of a translator, just the role of the translator changes slightly, but it's
Yep.
not completely replaced, because it will always need to be checked and proofread and edited.
Yep.
It just makes the job a lot smoother,
Yep.
and I suppose with ChatGPT, the fascinating thing is it can be applied in so many different contexts. You can do,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And people
you
are
know,
still discovering more and more.
yeah, I discovered it, could write poems yesterday, and I was trying to, write loads of different poems, and it's interesting if you don't specify. I noticed, I think it was, if you don't specify that you want the poem to rhyme, then it won't. So it's also, again, it's kind of about learning how to, how can I explain? It's almost like a different skill in itself, learning to feed the right information. The same with, the image generating AI. It's almost another skill. What keywords do I need to put in? Does that
Yeah.
make sense to get the right
Yeah.
image?
The AI has some assumptions, and you don't know what they are ahead of time, so you need to figure them out.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Awesome. I think we'll have to leave it there for today.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Sash, for chatting with us, for sharing your knowledge and all those examples. That's been
Thank you,
fantastic.
Becky. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you. And to everyone watching as well, we really hope that you enjoyed today's chat. See you again soon. Bye-bye. Let's end with a little bit about Logic. At Logic, we recruit specifically within the machine learning engineering and research fields in the UK, Canada, and the US. We pride ourselves on our innovative, community-led approach and having a deep knowledge and understanding of the roles that we recruit for. That's one of the reasons why I've started this podcast. If you're looking for your next professional challenge, or on the other hand, you might be an organization looking to expand your machine learning team, then please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message. Alternatively, you can send me an email to becky@logic.com. Let's set up a call for a chat, or we can meet in person for a coffee.